Thanks for tuning in to Canada's Farm Show. I'm your host, Cherilyn Jolly-Nagel, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. The topic for discussion, Canadian-made technologies destined for the export market. I am joined today by three exemplary panelists, or at least that's what I'm told. Trevor Thiessen from Redekop Management, Ben Voss from Raven Industries, and Leah Olson from PAMI, Prairie Agricultural Machinery Institute. Thanks to all three of you for joining me today.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
So rather than read a bio about each of you, or my funnest game making up something about each one of you, I thought we would give you each an opportunity to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your agricultural background, and then we'll circle back and discuss what it is that your industries are up to and how you're exporting some Canadian technology. So Ben, is it all right if we start with you? Give us your agricultural background and give us an introduction.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm actually coming to you from my farm today, which is up near Spiritwood. I grew up on about a 2,500 acre mixed cattle and grain farm. I purchased part of the farm from my parents a few years ago with my family. And I studied agriculture and bioresource engineering at the University of Saskatchewan. I've been an entrepreneur most of my life, and last year I joined Raven Industries. And today work from home, but look after sales for North America and Australia for Raven.
Thanks so much, Ben. Trevor, why don't you give us an introduction and share with us a bit about Redekop manufacturing?
Sure. So I'm one of these guys who got very fortunate and stumbled into the agricultural industry right out of university, and had the fortune of working for a guy named John Cross, who within about 6 months had convinced me that I was working in the most noble profession there was. And so I've managed to be very fortunate and stay in the industry my entire career. Spent the first 20 years in the crop input industry, and then in 2014, along with my business partner, Dean Meyerly, I purchased Redekop Manufacturing from the Redekop family. And so I've been here now for about 7 years. Love it and enjoy all the challenges that come with that. Redekop's focused on making crop residue solutions. We make straw choppers and a new weed control product that helps farmers manage the residue on their fields.
Thanks a lot for that, Trevor. I'm always fascinated to meet people who are working in the agriculture industry that didn't grow up as farm kids. I know today's session is about export, but we call you guys imports. So thanks for joining us in the agriculture sector. Leah, why don't you share a little bit about your agriculture background and tell us a bit about PAMI?
Great. Well, I mean, I grew up on a small grain farm, and my dad was an entrepreneur. And so, for many of the farmers, they would have seen him, or they've got one of his drop pins, because it is a standard across all major tractors. And the first farm show I actually worked was in 1987 at the Farm Progress Show. So my roots are pretty deep in the agriculture industry, but I spent about 20 years in Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and Winnipeg working in the rail pharmaceutical industries. I came back to Saskatchewan in 2013, and I have been involved in ag equipment manufacturing pretty much since that time, and joined PAMI in April of 2020. And a big part of my mandate is to rejuvenate the organization. We are emerging from the pandemic much stronger from a financial perspective, but throughout the pandemic, we've found a lot of really great entrepreneurs that we've continued to work with, as well as doing product validation and product development for some of the major equipment manufacturers too. So really pleased to be here today.
Yeah, thanks so much to all three of you. You know, it's my belief, and it's a bit of a biased one, that Canada has a great reputation for delivering innovations around the world as it relates to agriculture. Can you share with us some of your experiences and how you feel about Canada's reputation around the world?
I'll jump on that
Sure.
one. If anyone wants to fight me, you can take me out at the knees if you can reach. So, I've traveled quite a bit, and whenever people find out that I'm from Canada and that I'm involved in the agriculture industry, there's an assumption made that most of the farming that we do is top quality. We've worked with, at PAMI, we're working with some lesser developed countries, and they're very keen to understand and adopt some of our farm practices. And so our team works with producers internationally. In addition, I had the good fortune, and I was sponsored and supported by Ben actually in 2018 to be a part of the signing of the comprehensive, the CPTPP, which is a trade agreement that included over 13 countries. And while I was in Chile at the time, as a part of the Canadian delegation, I was approached by a number of countries asking for more information on the types of farming that we do, the types of farm equipment manufacturers that we have in Canada, because many of those other countries were looking to purchase farm equipment that had been developed and made in Canada because we have a reputation of being very high quality manufacturers. Go ahead, fight me.
Yeah, Trevor, you were
Yeah,
next.
no, we're not gonna fight you, Leah. That's a fool's errand. But I think my experience in the crop input industry was always that Canada had a very positive reputation, but I don't know that I appreciated how good it was until I started working in the ag equipment. And we have this, I think, reputation for having high quality, very reliable, very durable equipment. Probably a lot, is based on where we farm and the kind of land that we farm and the size of our farms. And so you kind of get this instant credibility when you go to another jurisdiction or country. If you say you're manufacturing in Canada, the quality kind of has preceded us, and that's in large thanks to all the pioneers who went ahead of those of us who are now exporting, who set a great reputation for our country.
Yeah. So it sounds like high quality is one of the measures that people use to describe Canada. And I would agree from a farmer's perspective, that's what we hear from our buyers of the commodities that we grow as well, is that we grow high quality grain and we are trustworthy. One of my frustrations as a farmer is often the transportation system and trying to get ourselves to be included in the reliable buyers as well when it comes to reputation. Oftentimes, if there's disruptions in the value chain, then those disruptions inhibit our reputation as a whole. And I'm wondering if you can share with us some of the obstacles that Canadian exporters of technology might face, and do you have some solutions for some of those obstacles? Ben, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure, I can jump in. Things that can impact you when you're trying to export to another country. Logistics and transportation infrastructure. When you're an inland jurisdiction like Western Canada is, without necessarily access to a seaport, you have to think about getting it across land first, then to a ship, then across to your destination, and then imported at the other end. Usually there's also the logistics of trying to disassemble and reassemble machinery. If it's a farm implement product, you need a partner at the other end who's capable of putting everything back together and then delivering it ultimately to the end user. There's rules and regulations that impact export to certain places. So European Union, as an example, has a lot of jurisdictional oversight that you have to be compliant with, safety rules and other things that require Canadian manufacturers to ensure their products meet those rules. They can be viewed as trade barriers in some cases because Canadian industry tends to be very welcoming. We allow other foreign countries to export their products here with relatively few regulations. And then I would also say that language and currency and insurance and transacting with customers in other jurisdictions is all an area that companies have to learn. And if you're going to a country that doesn't have English as a primary language or French, you're going to have a need to get translation done. Then banks and other institutions that work with you on moving your product to the other country and getting paid for it, they have to have some partners and operations there as well. Anyway, the list goes on as far as all the things you have to think through to get your product over to another country. But ultimately, it starts with getting it in a container, getting it on a train, then getting it to a ship.
Yeah, certainly a high-risk business. Thoughts from the others?
I think Ben gave a pretty exhaustive list. I mean, the good news is there's lots of resources here because we have so many companies who've gone before us and done this exporting thing already. And then we have government agencies like EDC on a federal level who are, set up and designed to help us with a lot of those barriers, whether it's getting the financing or helping manage the risk. Organizations like STEP here more locally in Saskatchewan that are a great place to tap into resources to try and overcome those obstacles. But I think if you're new to exporting, I don't think you can underestimate how many challenges you might face. And it's kind of a important task to ask a lot of questions and assume the worst, maybe don't assume the best as you're starting a new market.
Yeah, I think both Trevor and, Leah, go ahead.
I'm in agreement with what Ben and Trevor are saying. I think, in my work, what I'd also found with federal government officials that are trying to support exports is that when, the CPTPP was signed and there were other agreements that were signed, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement being one of them. Trade officials didn't understand that for ag equipment, it's not just opening up the border, but it's actually, as Ben identified, it's the dealership network. So Ben's identifying that very early on, you have to be able to get your equipment into a container. So if you can do that, that's but one aspect. But even if those trade barriers are not there and there's a good trade agreement in place, the local language, the rules of the what can be transported, the size of it, etc., is really important. And so for trade officials, whenever I've talked with them, I've identified that the dealer network is what's really important. So when we're talking to the local trade officials, it's important that the Canadian trade officials have an understanding of who the good business leaders are and be able to help manufacturers identify that early, because then once you have that, it kind of sprouts in terms of being able to export easily and manage warranty issues or any other challenges that may come up in the market.
Yeah, I think without a doubt, Canada is known to be a rules-based country when it comes to trade and export. And I suppose one of the challenges that really all three of you have mentioned is that we're not always exporting into countries that consider rules to be of the utmost priority. So what are you doing, as Canadian companies to mitigate some of that risk? Oftentimes when you're exporting into these countries, they are not as financially stable, their infrastructure is not as stable, and simple things like having somebody there at the port to put together the product that you have shipped over there may not be possible or feasible. Are you doing some things to mitigate some of those risks?
Okay. Sorry, Trevor, you go ahead. I went first last time.
That's all right. We might say the same thing, but I think what we've tried to do is before we get into some of those higher risk markets is find a good partner over there. And Leah mentioned this dealer network is critical, and whether that's a master distributor who's covering multiple countries or just someone for each local geography, it's pretty tough to just export directly to a farmer because they're definitely not going to be as likely set up to be able to handle all the risks in the export. We've taken a policy, and it's probably limited our sales in some of these markets, but we get payment up front if we don't know the partner. Once we've established a relationship, we can give them terms or try and get them on something like EDC insurance or some other receivables insurance, but payment up front and a local partner have been some of the ways that we've tried to mitigate it. And then before we ventured into any of these markets, I've just tried to call around to people like Ben or Leah or other people in the industry. That's one of the benefits of Saskatchewan. Most of us are willing to help our neighbor out. And people have been very forthright with giving us advice or caution, depending on the market we're trying to enter. So those are three of the things that we've done to try and mitigate that risk. But sometimes the opportunity is too good to pass up. You got to still take the risk and chase it.
Wonderful that you can share some of those experiences amongst each other. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we've been, Raven's been recently doing work in a lot of interesting countries. We've had to deal with things like security. So hiring independent security to keep our employees safe isn't an uncommon thing. You've also got, we're a company that holds pretty high standards around policies of ensuring that we comply with all laws and training all of our employees to understand that is a critical part of what we do. We tend to also put in place insurance and other things that we can use to mitigate risk. In my past experience in working in a lot of emerging market countries, you often had to rely heavily on the Canadian government's offices, if they had them there, to provide you with advice and support, like Trevor's mentioned and Leah has mentioned. But I know most of the big opportunities for export are in emerging markets, and we have, you have to be careful. As has been noted, it's not always the same laws or same practices, same customs as we're used to here.
Yeah, it's a bit of a learning experience, I'm sure. One of the things that the world has experienced together is certainly the COVID pandemic. And Leah, I'm wondering if you can share with us, there's been an awful lot of discussion over the past year about the impact of COVID on the agriculture industry. For me as a farmer, I feel so very fortunate to have had my space on the farm. I live socially distanced on a pretty regular basis. If I turned off the news and took a break from it, I really could escape from what the world was experiencing. But if you could share with us some of the impacts that your companies may have faced during the COVID pandemic, and do you see yourselves coming out of that, or are we going to be stuck with the ramifications for quite some time?
Yeah, no, great question. On our end, we're a service provider. So as I had identified a bit earlier, we do work with international entities. And when COVID hit and we were not able to go across the Canada-US border, we had a major contract of over $1 million just disappear like that. And so the impact to us was immediate. And while we appreciate, the support and governments are trying to help organizations, we did have to reduce our workforce because we simply lost, as I said, over $1 million in work. So for us, the adaptation has been a really important part of how we're remaining relevant to our clients. We've got a number of people that are working from home. We've adhered to all of the public health regulations. But for us, first and foremost, it's about being able to keep our employees safe and our clients safe. So what we see emerging post-pandemic, or even in the next couple of months as everybody's getting vaccinated, is that we will be welcoming people back into our organization, clients included. And, when you're doing product testing, our equipment doesn't require that people be really tight there. So we do anticipate we will see more clients coming to our sites in Humboldt and in Portage. But I would anticipate that moving forward, our workforce will continue to evolve as having a core set of people that work for us. But in addition, because of COVID, people are much more comfortable working virtually. And so our intent is we've already started our HR strategy on this, is to be able to access talent that may not be directly in our test site locations. And so for us, it's a real opportunity to be able to access specialized skills that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to.
From a bit of a totally different perspective, I would say I felt like COVID kind of skipped past us there for a while. Not to say we didn't have an impact. We obviously had to implement new rules. Our welders had to space out. We put on different shifts to kind of make sure that things were done well. But during COVID, we actually hired a lot of people and saw kind of a record year from a sales perspective. And I think that was in large part to the fact that we had started, exporting. Not all markets were, negatively impacted. Our European market was probably the worst hit from a timing. COVID hit around the time that we were trying to ship stuff to Europe, and that hurt us there. But markets like Australia, the US, and Canada had a pretty good year for us. And so, we were very fortunate. I said I felt like I was one of those few people in my group of friends who, kind of went to work every day, almost like it was normal, although it wasn't normal. We continue to have a good success. So I think, and I would say we're not the only manufacturer of ag equipment who felt that or saw that kind of trend. There was other organizations who were in the same boat as us who, saw good demand for their products, and the farming community wasn't as negatively impacted as maybe some others were.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing the spectrum of impact, but for Raven, we've had our sales have gone up considerably this year, but that's driven entirely by the surge in commodity prices with agriculture. So I'd say there's a fair argument as to whether the pandemic has had any influence over grain prices, but certainly there could be some connection there. Mm-hmm. The negative to it all, though, is that demand and supply chain is also unprecedented. We're seeing huge pressures, materials, and component shortages. And as a company that manufactures a lot of high-tech componentry that contains a lot of chips and semiconductors and items like that, we compete with the automotive industry, we compete with lots of sectors, and as you may have heard, there have been shortages of those components, and that's been pretty hard on our ability to meet the demand. We're working very hard to mitigate it, but it's not simple as just ordering more stuff. There are shortages out there. I also work in an international business, and not being able to travel to meet customers has certainly had an impact. Even interprovincial travel has been very limited. So, I work in Saskatchewan, but my office is technically in South Dakota, and I can't get down there very often. Not a lot of red tape. So I think it's getting better. As vaccination programs unfold, it's going to get better. You see, particularly in the U.S., things have really opened up. Restrictions are mostly lifted. Their economy is really returning to normal. And I think there's hope then that things can get that way here too.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ben. I mean, historically, I think the agriculture sector has been known to be about relationships. Farmer-to-farmer relationships, farmer-to-industry relationships. It's really how the industry has built itself, on a handshake and on trust, on relationships. But we've certainly seen a trend to more online purchases. Everything, every industry, from food to groceries, you name it, people are buying it now online more than they ever had before. So that will no doubt affect your ability to build relationships with your customers. Do you see this as a threat? Is it an opportunity? Is it just a matter of learning how to reach your customers differently? Any thoughts on that trend?
Yeah, I can start it off. I think the ag machinery industry and the ag tech industry in general views it as an opportunity and a threat at the same time. Online trends are going to occur whether we like it or not. The particular the flow from the connectivity between machinery and getting telematics information, being able to understand what's going on in the field, data gathering, all of that is here. Purchasing of things can be done online. Ag isn't as big of a market as the consumer segment, so you'd think there would be 5 or 6 Amazons for agriculture right now, and I know there's attempts at that, but when you got to buy filters for your tractor, it's not you can maybe buy 1 or 2 of them on eBay, but most of them you need to still go into the dealership and get them there. And eventually it may reach a scale where it can be done online, but today I think it's still hard to replace. At the flip side, there's a lot of discussion about buying of farm inputs like fertilizer, seed, chemical, things like that being done online. And a lot of the large ag retailers are moving to that format, being able to develop logistics and tendering and supply to the farm gate through an online format. Looks to be quite promising right now. But transacting machinery, other than Ritchie Brothers going to an online auction format, it's going to be, I think, still a while before you see people wanting to touch it before they buy it, to understand, especially something they've never bought before. They want to understand how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the online format has really opened up new pathways for us to communicate with customers, reach customers we couldn't otherwise reach. Like Ben made the comment earlier, during COVID, it was very restricted in terms of travel, but digital communication has opened up all kinds of ways to have these kind of calls and conferences with customers all over the world that we, were forced into, but, it's also kind of opened up new pathways to sell. However, as I think Ben's spot on, it's tough with this technical equipment that farmers want to touch and feel. It's hard to do that all on an online. And there's a lot of complexity. For us, we have to adapt our equipment to the combine that the farmer has. And so there's all kinds of add-on components we have to add to the base unit to make sure it's a good fit. That's very hard to do just on a tick box online. But there's definitely going to be a trend towards it, as Ben alluded to in the crop input side. Many companies are trying. No one's kind of hit it out of the park just yet, but we're going to see more and more of it. Maybe it's going to start with parts and move into larger equipment down the road, but I don't have the crystal ball answer for that one, that's for sure.
Leah, final thoughts?
Yeah, if I can, I'd just add on to that. What I think the pandemic has done for the better of the industry is that people who traditionally would not have been open to doing a virtual call like this had to, because of public health measures in place. And so, I think, for agrologists who have typically always spent their days in their vehicles, going from farm to farm to farm, they were exhausted because of all the travel that they were doing. But what I'm hearing from industry is that they're now exhausted because they're trying to figure out which online platforms. Is it Zoom? Is it any meetings? Is it Teams? And how do you adapt to that? So the stress is a bit different. And I think, we will continue to adapt according to that. But when we look at online sales, as Ben and Trevor both said, our equipment, or Canadian-made good equipment, tends to be a little more technologically advanced, and so you don't see that on any online auctions or anything like that. But what I think it is potentially going to impact quite substantially is, how do you get access to a client representative? And in some of the big farms, I know that they've got WhatsApp apps that they're using. Sometimes they'll include their local dealer and the local service representative. And so how we're communicating and evolving, I think, as an agriculture industry is, has been catapulted forward with the pandemic and the use of online technology.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for joining us today. We're just about out of time, but you've certainly reminded us all that agriculture has ebbed and flowed, adapted and accepted new innovations and technologies, and we will no doubt do that for all of these trends that are coming our way. Thank you so much for joining us today on this panel about agricultural technologies that are destined for export. And thank you for representing Canadian agriculture to the best of your ability around the world. We certainly appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
I hope you get more in North Bank.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, everyone, for tuning into this segment of Canada's Farm Show. Check out the agenda. This show is on demand. You can watch it your way, your time, your show. We'll see you soon.